Hi, my name is Nicole Kobie, and I am a journalist and the author of this book, The Long History of the Future, Why Tomorrow Tech Still Isn't Here, which um, I believe you guys are doing for your book club this month. So, the good people at Bakken have sent me a whole list of questions about the book and about my thoughts on kind of a wider range of tech and future topics. And I've had to narrow it down to just a few questions, which was very difficult to do because they're all really great. So let's kick off. Important thing to consider here is science versus technology or engineering versus commercialization. So science can unquestionably make a car fly. We get the physics of it. That's not a problem from a technological standpoint, like making a machine, engineering a machine. That was done back in the 1950s, and we can certainly do it today with existing technology that is much more advanced. It's really just a small plane that meets road requirements. So it's not actually that hard. Now, making a product that can disrupt how we commute, that fits into regulations, fits into society, fits into other people, is affordable-ish, that bit is a lot harder. Science isn't worried about making money, and the tech community has a lot of money to spend making prototypes. So figuring out the physics, we can call that a success. Figuring out how to build it, solving the engineering problems, I think we could also argue that that's a success. I mean, these things are out there and flying, and they're going to be taken to the air a lot more in the next few years. Now, has it made a particular company and its shareholders a lot of money? That's another form of success. And so far, no, that hasn't happened and quite likely won't happen anytime soon, at least. So success can mean a lot of different things when it comes to innovation, and it sort of depends on who you are and what your motivations are. So consider driverless cars. They exist. You can go in them. I'm based in London in the UK, and they're being trained on the roads here ahead of a launch probably in the next few months. And if you are excited by this from a technology standpoint or as an engineering problem, then this is a really great time for you. This is exciting stuff. Now, if you're looking for a solution to transport problems and traffic, well, this is probably not going to lead to success on that front. If you want a solution to road safety issues, we could take these technologies and apply them to standard cars, non-driverless cars, to address issues with, safety systems. So advanced driver assistance systems, or ADAS, which I think they have in the US as well as here in Europe and the UK, are these systems that do automatic braking and keeping you in lanes, in order to try to avoid accidents. And it's a great idea, but they don't always work great. My husband is a cars journalist, and some of what he tells me about this is absolutely terrifying. I think that driverless technologies applied to non-driverless cars could really help with these safety systems and could avoid accidents. And in my book, I talk about a researcher named Ernst Dickmanns who was working in Germany in the 90s. And the type of work that he was doing has kind of fed into safety systems in cars in Germany. So in Mercedes-Benz cars now, a lot of the driverless and safety systems are based on his work from decades ago. So I consider that a success. Sometimes success isn't solving the problem you initially were targeting, but something else. And I think that as long as all of this effort kind of builds towards something that benefits people, I think we can call it a success. I think hype both accelerates and distorts when it comes to innovation and progress. Hype isn't inherently bad. If it's coming from engineers or people who are working on these projects, it's just because they're excited and passionate about it. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the problem is when hype gets out of hand or it gets kind of leveraged to other purposes, and companies can be a little disingenuous about it. You've got a PR for a startup, and they need to hype the company up to get headlines and coverage, which might mean that they are over egging the technology and what it can actually do and its real potential. But without that media coverage, that company is not going to be able to get funding to do the work. In the very sort of extreme dark side of this, you've got companies like Theranos that was saying the technology could do things that were just not possible. And on the flip side, the sort of more benign is just companies kind of exaggerating their progress in order to get coverage. So in a sense, I'd say hate the game, not the player. we need a better system for funding key technologies, in particular ones that could solve real problems rather than just make, big tech companies even more money. And to be fair, at a science level, I think that remains largely academic and government funded. And even at an engineering level, kind of a lot of the early work is paid for by the military, especially when it comes to things like robotics and that sort of thing. And that naturally colors what is made and developed. Anyway, so back to hype. The thing with hype is it does pull funding away from less hyped ideas. So AI is a good example right now. Like, good luck getting funding or attention for a project that doesn't have anything to do with AI. If you don't describe your company as an AI company, you're not going to make headlines. On the flip side, we have two previous examples of, funders and governments and the wider public getting very tired of AI and its complete failure to deliver on promises. And that sparked, a backlash known as AI winters. And this is decades and decades back, right? And government and funding agencies just stopped putting money into AI. It got very, very little funding at an academic level. Now, of course, some academics kept working on it, notably like Geoffrey Hinton, who clearly doesn't need our hype to drive his work. He just kept on keeping on, and it's obviously worked out very, very well for him. And I think that perhaps that is a better way to go about things. A little bit of hype and excitement is fine, but if it's going to be so extreme that it causes a backlash, that means, we have a decades long delay to this work. That's less good. So I do think we could stand to calm down a little bit. But that's not directed at the people making these projects. If you are working on something that is getting ignored right now because of AI and you want to hype it up so that you can get the attention to do your work, you should have at it. And if you're being a little disingenuous, trying to just leverage hype in order to get funding for a project that isn't really AI based, well, you're part of the problem. Yeah, I think AI, in particular generative AI, is very much in this overhype mode. I don't think there's a whole lot of people who disagree on that point right now. I do think AI, this generative AI, your Claudes, your Chat GPTs, Gemini, that sort of thing. I think it is useful, and I'm really intrigued by the way it's being used by coders in particular. I spoke to an academic this week who uses AI to solve his coding issues. So when he hits a wall coding, AI can offer solutions that he'd previously take like hours or even days on, messing around on Google trying to figure out the solution for and trying to unpick it. But a lot of the claims being made about AI are clearly extreme and very unproven. Like, do I think AI is going to wipe out all office jobs? I don't. I really don't think that the people who make AI understand what other people do at work. AI can write a report, sure, but it can't come up with new ideas. Actually doesn't write all that well. Maybe that's just me as a professional writer saying that, but it really doesn't write all that well. And all those like hallucinations we were hearing about like last year, those haven't gone away just because people stopped talking about them. And they're a feature, not a bug. This is how the system works. It doesn't have a sense of truth and it doesn't have a sense of reality. So if your job involves information that doesn't need to be accurate, you could absolutely use AI now for everything. But everybody else who needs to be based in reality and truth, it's a bit more of a problem. So there are some solutions to this in the works, using different types of AI or combining different types of AI, or having another AI look at the results to try to spot errors. But the idea of sending, an AI to a meeting for you to take notes and then having it write up a report for you and summarizing that report and then emailing that summary to your coworkers. Like, if you can't be bothered to listen to the information, to write it down, to read it, and then to send it, I just think the information ever needed to be noted down. And I think we could all just skip the meeting and get on with our real jobs because it's clearly not, mission critical. So I have seen some good real use cases with AI. It has always been helping people do something extra in their role, sort of additive. I know there's some good examples of like replacing things with automation and stuff, but the stuff that I think that is actually useful is when it's letting somebody do something they couldn't do before. So pulling out data that was hard to find or impossible to find, or doing translations that you'd have to have paid somebody and waited a long time to get done, that sort of thing. I keep trying to use AI in my work as a journalist, but beyond being useful as sort of a search tool, it's usually just a waste of time and not worth my effort. Maybe that will change as the technology gets better. But in the meantime, we're having to contend with environmental damage, risks to our brains and our mental health, and so on, and the political implications of all of this. And I find I can't really ignore that for technology that I don't think is actually delivering what is promised. Now, what's great about AI as a future tech is you can just go and use it. Like you can go just to Claude or to Gemini and to ChatGPT and just give it a go and figure out what you think about it. And that's not true of, say, hyperloops or flying cars. I get invited to go see things, but not everybody can go see this stuff. So with I recommend just picking a chatbot of choice or going with all three of them or, the major ones. Pick a topic that you know a lot about, have a chat with it, or, try to give it a task or something like that. Have it look up some information for you. And I think it will become very obvious that, whether it's capable of that or not. And I think it's worth choosing a topic that you know a lot about because then you can see where the flaws are. And then just remember if you use it for anything else, that those flaws are still there. Um, so yeah, AI, I think we need to wait a little bit and see how that's gonna come out. Next question. I think this is a great question, and I think that it's at the core of a lot of the work that I do because I think a lot of tech is a solution without a problem. And in a way, that's okay because we come up with solutions for other problems while working on them, and that's great. And I'm generally kind of behind all scientific engineering efforts that are just for the sake of it. That kind of work is the good stuff, is what pushes us forward and gives us progress in a whole range of different areas. And I think that that's very, very positive. Um, but I do think that if, when you talk about technology, the hype around it can kind of draw attention away from simpler solutions. So if you talk about, say, driverless cars or flying cars, for example, what problem are they solving? Traffic? Well, we need fewer cars on the road, not more. And there's no amount of flying cars that is going to be able to deal with the traffic of a city like London. I mean, it would just ruin our skies. How about safety? And safety is one reason that Google's Waymo, they talk about it a lot because one of the original founders of the project lost a friend to a car accident when they were quite young, and it's something that really means a lot to him. And I do believe that that matters to him. But if you want to improve road safety, waiting for driverless cars to maybe exist and to slowly roll out, because it is going to take decades and decades to get them to replace non-driverless cars, standard cars. In the meantime, we're not improving road safety. So what we could do is just reduce speeds and redesign roads with just minor tweaks. So in places where there's a lot of pedestrian crossings, just make wider pavements so pedestrians don't have as far to cross. Like really simple things like that have a huge impact. And that work is happening. There's a lot of like Vision Zero projects trying to make it so that no pedestrians are killed in car traffic and things like that. But that doesn't make as many headlines as a driverless car driving around London. And the reduction of speeds and things is a big deal. And it's happening across this city. There's a road outside of my house that was originally 30 miles an hour and it's now 20, and that doesn't make headlines. But I'm glad that they took the time to do it because it's an easy change a sign and a few rules, and try to follow up on enforcing it and things like that. That's a lot easier to achieve now and get the result now for a lot less money than waiting for driverless cars, which may or may not ever happen. Um, Another example, I guess, is emissions. That's a big one with cars. The idea is that driverless cars can drive smarter and better and will therefore let off fewer emissions. But the simple answer is that cars cause emissions. They don't reduce them. And even if they're electric, they still cause other forms of pollution. I remember when I was working on this book, I was on the phone with an executive at a now defunct flying car company, and he was saying that London needed to link Heathrow Airport with the city in Canary Wharf, because that's where all the bankers are, that's where all the financial companies are, because the time that it took them to get from the airport to the offices where they're having their meetings was just too long of a drive, because the traffic is so bad here, and it was hurting business. Now, I don't know, London's business district seems to be doing perfectly fine without having to put a bunch of flying cars in the sky. But that was their answer, was that we're gonna link Heathrow with the financial districts. Now, what was funny, and I laughed with this executive at the time about this, was that very same week was when the train line that is now known as the Elizabeth line, is kind of London's first major train line in decades, more than that, had just opened. And last year, it carried 240 million passengers, not just from Heathrow to the city in Canary Wharf, but to points in between because trains can stop everywhere, and to further points out beyond both of those destinations. I don't know how many flying cars it would take to carry 240 million passengers a year. And like that number is growing. The air would be absolutely buzzing with these vehicles. Trains are just clearly a better solution to this problem. They exist. We don't have to wait for a company that is now out of business. It is just a more simple solution. So my argument is always if you've got a problem that needs solving and it needs solving now, solve it with ideas and solutions that exist now. If you want to link two cities or 2 points in a city to reduce air travel and to reduce driving, you don't need to install a hyperloop because those don't exist. You need a high-speed train, which is a well-known technology that exists and we could just put in now. And it might take 10 years, but we could start the work now rather than having to invent a new solution. So that is something that I could talk about for hours and hours, but we'll move on to the next question. The question is, one thread in the book is that technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by economics and regulation and human behavior. And which of those forces do I think is most underestimated when people talk about why the future, isn't here yet? So here's the thing. Whether it's economics or money or regulation or politics, all of that is just human behavior. It's just people. And I think all of these issues are just people problems. And the problem is a lot of us kind of suffer some inertia when it comes to the status quo. So we're not really willing to let future technologies in or progress happen until we've been convinced of it because we don't want to lose out with what we've already got. So if you think of electric cars, EVs, we keep hearing about how hard it would be to have charging points everywhere. Like we're going to have to go install charging points at every petrol or gas station, right? But we are super fine with the fact that gas stations exist on every other block. And that clearly took effort to build, decades and decades of effort to build out that infrastructure. Gas is dangerous. Its fumes are explosive and it causes cancer. Yet we've accepted this in our lives. So I feel like we could probably handle, a few charging stations as well alongside all of this infrastructure. It shows it can be done. Another example, also not in the book, this is just stuff that's not in the book, is, solar panels. They work. Yeah, they have downsides, they have costs, but getting power for your house, getting energy for your house through solar panels is easier than shipping gas or oil through war zipple. And it comes with all sorts of benefits from being like cheaper and safer and better for the environment and giving us energy sovereignty and all of these things. But things like solar panels and EVs, they get they get run down for a reason. They don't benefit the people who are already in charge. So on the flip side, you look at something like driverless cars, which like we've all been living without for a long time and we don't really need. They're not going to just integrate into our lives smoothly, right? Yet we are putting all of this effort into allowing them on city streets. We're letting people tell us what is worth our time and money and so on. And while at the same time, they're often making other ideas seem impossible. So it's a very convoluted way to say that, the ideas that we find acceptable and that we think are possible are often decided by what we think is possible now. And that is decided by, who has the money to pay for things and who has the power now. And future tech should be designed to benefit all of us, not just those who want to cling to power or make money or make their mark on the world or whatever else. There are so many ideas that I'd like to challenge. That it's inherently high tech, because some of the best ideas are not. That it needs money to drive it and to thrive. I mean, the web happened because Tim Berners-Lee opted not to license his ideas. And those were in turn created government research for this facility, which is where most innovation actually begins its life. I also think the idea that we don't get to have a say in innovation or the decisions that lead to it. Like we do. It's our world. It's our tax money being spent on a lot of these projects. It's our future, and we don't have to let like the so-called tech bros rule and make decisions just based on what they want. That's how it's done now. It doesn't have to be that way. So if whatever city you're in decides to let driverless cars happen, and you don't want them to, then protest it. If you don't like a data center going into your house, go talk to your city council. Like we do have means to push back, and there's a huge amount of progress being made, especially on kind of the data center front with AI. Um, People who you wouldn't assume to have a lot of power in these situations are stopping some of the richest people in the world, some of the richest companies in the world from getting to just do what they want all of the time. And I think that's a good thing. So if you don't like what's happening, you can do. But the one idea that I would really like to leave you all with is that any of this is as high tech as it seems. And I think a really good example is driverless cars. They get stuck all the time and they need to phone home. So they need to ask for help. And there's a remote operator that will say, oh, yeah, take a left there. That's got to take a left there. Or they'll actually take over remote steering with some of the systems. And as these companies scale up, increasingly those calls, those remote calls for help are going to call centers overseas. And that means that people who maybe have never been to your city and never been to that street, don't know how to drive, don't have a driver's license for your region, might be telling the car what to do. I think that's a bit wild. There's some other great examples of this. Waymo is reportedly using DoorDash to send humans to go shut doors of their driverless vehicles that have been left open, when a passenger gets out, because the cars have no means to shut the door. This was a regular taxi. The driver would get out in a bit of a huff and be like, oh, you could at least have shut the door. In this case, the car can't do that. So they were paying people to go over there to shut the door. Just generically, like a cab driver is responsible for their own vehicle, more or less, depending on who they work for. And like if a car takes a drunk person home after the bar, a night out at the bar, and they vomit in the car, who is cleaning that up? I mean, the Waymo isn't. There's no driver in it. Are they just going to end up going to pick up another person and then they arrive with a vomit-filled seat? A lot of these systems actually have a lot more people in it, whether it's person cleaning it, a person using the in-car cameras to see the state of the vehicle to make sure that it's clean for the next rider, sending somebody to shut a door. All of those kinds of things involve humans still, because automating in the real world is really hard. This is true of AI. So there's a lot of stories about AI actually being humans doing the hard work. The joke is AI doesn't actually stand for artificial intelligence, but actually Indian. And that kind of came about after a company called Builder AI said that they could use AI to build an app for you. You just describe the app and they would kind of vibe code it and their AI would bring it into existence for you. But it turned out they were just using cheap overseas labor to do it. Amazon for a while had a checkout free store system where you just took things off and put it into your basket, and its system would know that you had that and bill you for it. It turned out that there was a lot of remote human operation in that system, and they would have to send people out to restock things because everything had to be stocked perfectly for the system to work. So it was really dependent on people. The same thing goes for, humanoid robots in your home. There's this idea of like robot butlers and things like that. Right now, they are largely remotely human operated. And it goes on. So I think that when we talk about automation and the future and AI, what we need to realize is it's often still humans driving this, that kind of last little gap, we've got this 99% fixed. Well, the 1% is being done by humans overseas who are not being paid very well, and we're just pretending that they don't exist. And I think some honesty around that would be a good thing to see. Thanks so much for reading the book, and I hope you enjoy it.